Living in the afterlife. Living in the afterlife. This is one of my mantras that holds a lot of meaning to me. Out of context, it sounds strange, maybe even dark, but it floats around in my mind the way a song gets stuck in your head, returning without invitation, carrying something with it every time it arrives. I sometimes feel like a cat, 9 lives. So many versions of a life already lived. So many people who filled those chapters completely. People I would have sworn would be around for a long time, and then, quietly or suddenly, they were gone. Vanished from my world, from my daily reality. I've thought a lot about why this happens, and I've arrived at something that feels true to me. That some souls are simply meant to cross paths for a limited point in time, holding enormous meaning while they're here, and then, once the time is up, never crossing again. It's not a failure. It's just the nature of certain connections. Coworkers, friends, partners, people you built a whole world with, however temporarily, and then the world shifted and they were on the other side of it. And I stayed, because at the end of the day, I'm still here, in my own body, in my own life. And as I sit here sometimes, looking out the window, reflecting on our history together, the mysteries surface. Where are they now? And where do I go from here? How do you live the rest of your life, day after day, without that important someone there? That's what I mean when I say I'm living in the afterlife. A ghost wandering through the rooms of a life that used to be populated differently. So much time to spend. A certain lostness that demands a resolution it can't quite find. What I've learned is that time does something specific with this feeling. It doesn't erase it, I want to be clear about that, but it transforms it. Slowly, it takes the ache of absence and turns it into something I can actually hold. Memory. The ideas someone left behind in me. The character traits I absorbed from them without realizing it. All of it woven into the fabric of who I am because I cherish the limited time we had. Communication may be lost, but my memory remains and holds a torch for what that long-lost friend left me with. I think about the impression I'm leaving on others, because here's what quietly hits me. Like so many who have vanished from my world, I myself will vanish from someone else's one day. My name will float through someone's mind the way certain names float through mine. And I hope, genuinely hope, that what I leave behind in them is something worth carrying. Something that keeps the lights on for them the way the vanished ones kept mine on for me. So I choose to live in the afterlife fully alive, carrying everyone who shaped me, moving forward not despite the losses, but somehow because of them, because their absence reminded me that time is finite and presence is a gift, and nothing lasts quite as long as we expect it to. Reality has it that we can't turn back the hands of time, but I can keep the lights on as the one who stayed behind. And so the question that remains always is simply, where do I go now? And I'll ask you the same. Is there someone who vanished from your life whose influence you're still carrying without always realizing it? And what do you think they left in you that you haven't fully acknowledged yet?
The ones who stay. I've been thinking about the difference between the ones who leave and the ones who stay. It's not always about effort. It's not always about love or loyalty or even geography. Some connections just have a longer half-life than others, and I've never been entirely sure why. But I've started paying closer attention to it. There's a particular kind of person in my life who has simply remained. Through the moves, the reinventions, the seasons where I was difficult to reach or difficult to know. They stayed anyway. Not dramatically, not with a declaration or a grand gesture, just quietly, consistently, still there when I looked up. And I think I've underestimated what that means. It's easy to romanticize the ones who left. Absence has a way of crystallizing people, They become the best version of themselves in memory, frozen at the moment they were most vivid to you. The ones who stay don't get that treatment. They're too present to be mythologized, too real, too available, too woven into the ordinary texture of your days to be elevated into something legendary. And yet they are, in their own way, the more remarkable ones. I've thought about what it takes to be someone who stays. It requires a kind of patience that doesn't ask for recognition. A willingness to show up for the unremarkable versions of a person, the tired ones, the distracted ones, the ones who aren't performing their best self, but are just living. The ones who stay have seen all of that and chosen to continue anyway. That's not nothing. That's actually quite rare. And there's something the staying ones teach you that the vanished ones can't. The vanished ones teach you about impermanence, about the value of a season, about how much can be contained in a limited time. But the ones who stay teach you about depth, about what a relationship becomes when it has enough time and enough honesty to move past the surface. About the particular intimacy of being truly known by someone, not the curated version of you, but the accumulated, complicated, still in progress version. I find myself wanting to be more deliberate about acknowledging them, more conscious of what it means that they chose, repeatedly and without fanfare, to remain. Because I think in the general motion of life, in all the forward movement, all the new people, all the chapters opening, it's possible to take the staying ones for granted, to assume their presence without really seeing it. There's a balance I'm still working out between honoring the memory of those who left and fully inhabiting the reality of those who stayed. The afterlife of lost connections is real and worth tending. But the present life of enduring ones deserves at least as much attention, maybe more. The ones who stay are the ones still writing the story with you. And that's worth stopping to recognize, not just in memory, but in the present tense, while there's still time to say it. So I'll ask you, who in your life has simply stayed, quietly and without making much of it? And when did you last actually tell them what that means to you?
The unfinished thought. There's a certain beauty behind an unfinished thought, a rhetorical question with no answer yet, a story marked to be continued. These things used to feel like incompleteness to me, like something had gone wrong, like I'd left a door open that should be closed. Now, I see them differently. They're expansion. They're the mind doing what it was built to do. I think of the mind as a house I keep developing, adding new rooms, expanding passageways, reorganizing the layout when the old arrangement stops making sense, changing the furniture, redecorating when a space has been the same way for too long and something in me knows it's time for it to become something else. The house is never finished, and I've come to understand that that's not a problem. That's the whole point. This channel is a love letter to all my unfinished thoughts. Thoughts in the making. Thoughts being cultivated right now, in real time, as I speak them out loud for the first time. It's a circle. I'll come back to these ideas, keep hold of them, let them develop at whatever pace they need. Some of them may mature into something magnificent, something with powerful meaning that reshapes how I see a whole dimension of my life. Others may turn out to have been interesting thought experiments, worth the time, worth the exploration, but not destined for anything larger than the experience of thinking them through. I like them all, every single one. There was a time when that wasn't true. For a long time, I chased the perfection of an idea. I'd hold thought back from the world, and from myself, honestly, until it was finished enough, polished enough, certain enough to deserve the space it took up. And what I found is that ideas treated that way tend to calcify. They stop moving. They become fixed objects rather than living things, and somewhere in the pursuit of getting them right, I lost the best part of them. The aliveness, the motion, the sense that they were going somewhere. Ideas can't be perfected. The world is constantly in motion, and a thought that chases perfection is a thought that keeps missing the moment it was meant for. What matters is that the thinking is honest, that it's moving, that it's willing to be wrong, willing to revise, willing to arrive somewhere different from where it started. Thinking is a gift. For those of us who have the capacity to make mental connections, to hold two unrelated ideas next to each other until they reveal something neither one contained alone, that's something worth taking seriously, worth using to its full advantage, worth building a whole practice around. So that's what this is. A practice, a living record of a mind at work, not finished, not polished, not waiting until it's ready, just thinking out loud, adding another room to the house, leaving certain doors open on purpose, because an open door is an invitation to come back, to go deeper, to find out what's on the other side when the time is right. And I'll ask you, what's an unfinished thought you've been carrying around that you've never given enough space to actually develop? What would happen if you stopped waiting for it to be ready and just started building the room?
The house of the mind. Every mind is a house. And like any house, it has rooms you spend time in every day. Familiar, well-lit, the furniture arranged exactly where you expect it. And it has other rooms, ones you haven't opened in a while, ones you renovated years ago and haven't revisited since, ones you're not entirely sure what to do with yet. I think about my own house a lot. The rooms that get the most use, the creative workroom, the analytical space where I turn problems over until something gives, the room where I process emotions slowly and privately. These are the rooms I know well. The switch lights are where I expect them. I know which floorboards creak. But then there are the rooms I'm still building. Passageways being carved between ideas that never used to be connected. And suddenly they are. And the house feels larger for it. And I wonder how I navigated it before those two spaces could speak to each other. That's what a new mental connection feels like. A doorway opened between rooms that were always adjacent but never knew it. There are rooms I've had to redecorate. Beliefs I held for years that turned out to need new furniture, not thrown out entirely, just updated, rearranged, stripped of things that no longer belonged. That process is slower than it sounds. You get attached to the way a room looks when it's been a certain way for a long time. Changing it feels like losing something, even when what you're gaining is more space. And then there are the locked rooms. Every house has them. The ones that hold something that isn't ready to be examined yet, or that you've been meaning to get to and haven't. I try not to pretend those rooms aren't there. I know what's in most of them, at least an outline, and I've learned that naming a locked room is its own kind of progress. You don't have to open the door today, but knowing the door exists, knowing what's behind it, changes something about how you move through the rest of the house. The rooms I love most are the ones still under construction. Half-built, unfinished, the walls not yet painted, the floor not yet laid, but the shape already clear enough to walk around in. These are the unfinished thoughts. The ideas with enough form to inhabit, but not so much form that they've stopped growing. There's a particular aliveness in those spaces that the finished rooms don't have. The finished rooms are comfortable. The unfinished ones are interesting. I think the goal, if there is one, is to keep adding on. To never let the house become entirely fixed. To always have at least one room under construction, one passageway being opened, one wall being taken down because what was once a division has become unnecessary. A mind that stops expanding is a house that stopped being lived in. And I intend to keep living in mine for a long time. So I'll ask you, which room in your own mind's house has been locked the longest? And if you're honest with yourself, do you already know what's in it?
The mindful body. Mindfulness is magical.
I realize this every day, the moment I wake up and cross the threshold from sleep back into consciousness. That first breath of awareness, the body coming back online, the mind returning from wherever it went. It's a small miracle that happens so regularly we forget to notice it. But as I've gotten older, I've started to notice things I didn't used to. A dull ache with no clear cause, a stiffness that wasn't there yesterday, the body sending signals I'm only now learning to actually read. And what I've found almost every time is that the answer leads me back to something simple: posture, the way I'm holding myself in space. Posture is one of those things that sounds almost too basic to take seriously, and yet the body keeps teaching me otherwise. It's not just about sitting up straight. It's the whole relationship between the body and whatever position it's been asked to hold, for however long it's been asked to hold it. Sitting, standing, lying down. Every configuration has its own version of mindfulness required. When I'm at my desk, I've had to learn to pay attention to the way I settle into a chair over time. There's a specific kind of slow collapse that happens when focus narrows onto a screen and the body is forgotten. The shoulders round, the head drifts forward, the lower back loses its support. It happens gradually, without announcement, and it accumulates. So I set a timer, a maximum of an hour before I get up, move around, let the body remember it exists outside of the task. Sometimes that means a short walk, sometimes light cleaning, something that moves the body differently, resets the whole system. At my day job, I've recently gotten into the habit of using a standing desk because I find that it's the easiest to slouch while doing that kind of work, and the fatigue it creates when I lose mindfulness toward it is disproportionate to how long I was actually sitting. The body keeps score in ways the mind doesn't always track in real time. Even rest has its own postures worth attending to. I've noticed that dull aches can arrive in the night simply from the way I've been lying. An arm held at the wrong angle long enough to affect circulation, a neck in a position that seems neutral until it isn't. When I notice these things, I shift, slowly and intentionally, not just to a different position, but to a better one. There's a pose from yoga I return to sometimes when resting, child's pose. It does something specific for me, a reshifting of balance that releases tension I didn't know I was holding. The body knows how to restore itself if you give it the right invitation. All of this is mindfulness, not just the meditation cushion version, the famous formal eyes closed version, but the continuous low-level practice of staying present in the body throughout an ordinary day, checking in, adjusting, treating the body as something that deserves ongoing attention rather than a vehicle you occasionally remember you're driving. So I'll ask you, when did you last actually check in with how your body is holding itself right now? And if you shifted into a more comfortable, more sustainable position, what would that actually feel like? The body as messenger. The body is always talking. The question is whether you're listening. I spent a lot of years treating my body like background infrastructure, something that ran on its own, that I didn't need to actively manage as long as nothing went dramatically wrong. And for a while, that worked, or seemed to. The signals were there, but I had enough energy to override them, enough momentum to keep moving past them without stopping to ask what they were about. Getting older changed that negotiation. The signals got harder to ignore, and I started to realize that they had never actually been quiet, I just hadn't been fluent in the language. Learning to read the body is like learning any language. You start with the obvious ones, the loud ones, the ones that are impossible to miss. And gradually, you develop sensitivity to the subtler signals, the ones that arrive early, before anything becomes urgent, when there's still time to respond with something gentle rather than something drastic. A tightness across the shoulders that appears on certain kinds of days, a specific fatigue that comes from mental overextension rather than physical work, heavier, flatter, less responsive to sleep. The particular restlessness that arrives when I've been too sedentary, when the body has been asked to be still for too long and is quietly requesting permission to move. These signals have patterns once you start paying attention, and the patterns, once recognized, become useful. What I've found is that the body rarely overreacts.
Its messages tend to be proportional. A small signal for a small adjustment needed, a louder one for something that's been building. The problem isn't that the body is dramatic. The problem is usually that the signal was ignored long enough to become dramatic, and then it gets blamed for the urgency it was driven to. I've started treating physical discomfort less as an inconvenience and more as information. When something aches without obvious cause, I don't immediately reach for a solution. I get curious first. When did this start? What was I doing? What have I been doing less of or more of in the days before this? Sometimes the answer is simple: posture, movement, sleep. Sometimes it points somewhere less obvious: stress held in a specific place, tension that belongs to something emotional as much as physical. The body doesn't separate those categories the way the mind does. It holds everything. What happened today, what happened years ago, what you haven't yet allowed yourself to feel. All of it registered somewhere in the tissue, in the breath, in the way you're holding your jaw right now without realizing it. That's not mysticism, that's just how the body works. The practice I keep returning to is simple. Pause. Scan. Ask what's actually being communicated rather than what's most convenient to assume. And then respond, gently, proportionally, the way you would to any message worth receiving. The body has been reaching you. It's been sending the same message in different forms for longer than you might realize. So I'll ask you, is there something your body has been telling you lately that you've been too busy or too uncomfortable to actually stop and hear?
The flame. It's no cliché to ask what the meaning of life is. I ask myself this question all the time, and I've come to realize that one of my favorite questions, maybe the most powerful one I have, is simply asking why. Why this? Why now? Why does this matter and that doesn't? Asking why until the answers run out, until you've followed the thread all the way back to something that can't be explained further. That's where meaning comes in. Meaningfulness, as I understand it, is an emotion, something felt rather than concluded. It's tied to every little thing I do in life, woven into the texture of choices, reactions, the things I reach for and the things I pull back from. It's part of my heart, a certain internal scale that tells me this, yes, that, no. And the more I learn to listen to that scale, the clearer I can hear it. I think of life as a flame. A flame doesn't want to go out. It doesn't analyze its own existence or deliberate about whether to keep burning. It simply burns, because that's what it does, because that's what it is. And when something tries to extinguish it, everything in the flame resists. That's how I perceive my own will, my own desire. There's simply a part of me that says, I want to keep living, to keep enjoying, to pursue happiness, not the shallow version, the one that asks for nothing and gives nothing back, but the real kind, the one that requires something. And the real kind requires bending, making sacrifices that at first don't feel like sacrifices because they're made towards something worth making them for. Bending my mind to seek enrichment and joy in ways I didn't even realize I could bend. That last part surprises me still. The capacity I discover I have when I'm genuinely reaching towards something meaningful, the flexibility that appears when I thought I was already at my limit. I think that's what meaning actually does. It doesn't just give you a reason to continue, it expands what continuing looks like. It opens up directions you wouldn't have noticed without it. A meaningful life is not a comfortable life necessarily, but it's a life that justifies its own discomforts, that makes the sacrifices make sense, that gives the effort somewhere worth going. The clarity arrives slowly and then suddenly. The more I think about it, the clearer it becomes. The fog lifts one layer at a time, and then one morning you realize you can see further than you could before, and you're not entirely sure when that happened. It comes from asking why, from following the thread, from being willing to sit with the question longer than is comfortable, until the question itself becomes less about finding an answer and more about learning to live inside the asking. The flame just keeps burning, and I think that's enough of an answer most days. The desire itself is the meaning. The wanting to continue, to grow, to discover, that wanting is not separate from the point. It is the point. So I'll ask you, when you follow your own why all the way back, past all the reasons that borrow from other people's answers, what's the thing that's actually, genuinely yours? The one that doesn't need anyone else's permission to matter.
The why beneath the why. There's a children's game that philosophers have been playing for centuries. You take any statement, any belief, any assumption, any thing you think you know, and you ask why. And then you take the answer and ask why again, and again, and again. Most people stop after 2 or 3 rounds. The answers start to feel uncomfortable, or obvious, or embarrassingly simple. But if you keep going, if you stay with it past the point where it's polite to stop, something interesting happens. The answers start to thin out. The confident explanations that felt solid a few levels up begin to feel borrowed. Things you thought you believed turn out to be things you were told to believe, and somewhere along the way stopped questioning. And eventually you arrive at something that has no explanation underneath it, a bedrock, something that simply is, that you feel rather than reason your way to. That's usually where meaning lives. I've done this with my own life. I've followed threads back through layers of justification and inherited assumption until I hit something that felt genuinely mine. And what I find every time is that the things with real roots, the values and desires that survive the questioning, are the ones tied to feeling rather than logic. They can't be argued away because they were never an argument in the first place. They just are. The why beneath the why is rarely what you expected. You start with a goal, a career, a relationship, a possession, an achievement, and you follow it back. Why do I want this? Because it will make me feel secure. Why do I need to feel secure? Because without it, I don't feel free. Why does freedom matter? And there it is. The thing underneath everything else. The actual thing. The one that was running the whole operation from the start without being named. Once you name it, something shifts. The goal you started with might still be worth pursuing, or it might turn out to be a proxy for something more direct, and you realize you've been taking a long route to something you could approach differently. The questioning doesn't destroy meaning. It clarifies it. It strips away the borrowed layer and leaves what's actually yours. I find this practice more useful than almost any other tool I've encountered for understanding myself, because the surface reasons, the ones we give other people and sometimes ourselves, are almost never the whole story. There's always more underneath. And the more of it you're willing to uncover, the less you find yourself working against your own grain without knowing why. The asking isn't comfortable. It requires a willingness to find out that some of what you've been doing doesn't trace back to anything you actually believe, that it traces back to fear, or habit, or someone else's idea of what your life should look like. That's not a pleasant discovery, but it's an honest one. And honest tends to be more useful than comfortable in the long run. So I'll ask you, if you took one thing you're currently working toward and asked why, honestly, 5 times in a row, do you think you'd end up where you expected, or somewhere else entirely?